The Tennessee Valley Act of the 1930s drastically changed that part of Tennessee, both economically and sociologically. On today's program, we will talk about agriculture and industry as it was affected or not affected in the area. Also, we'll have a performance by the Ball State Graduate String Quartet and a Louisiana educator's views on gifted and talented students. Robert W. Gilmer is visiting research professor at the Ball State University Center for Energy, Research, Education, and Service. He talks with us today about changes in the Tennessee Valley brought about by construction of the TVA project. Mr. Gilmer is on leave from the staff of the chief economist at Tennessee Valley Authority. Mr. Gilmer, first let's establish what the TVA is. I think maybe some of our younger viewers might not be as familiar with it.
The TVA was established in 1933. It's a unique institution in the United States. Essentially, it engages in what the TVA itself calls integrated resource management, which means that all aspects of the control of the Tennessee River are really under the auspices of the TVA. They engage in agricultural programs, forestry projects, navigation projects, flood control, and power production. And in essence, they replace all of the agencies who would normally enter this region for these projects related to the river, the Department of Agriculture or the Department of Interior in the case of forestry, or the Corps of Engineers.
But why was the purpose to establish a cheap electricity or recreation or forestry projects, or was it to tame a river?
Well, the initial purpose of the act was to tame the river, to control it. It was a wild river in certain parts of it, very shallow and not navigable in other parts of the river. So the purpose, first of all, was to control the river for flood control, to prevent damages, especially in the Chattanooga area, where even despite the TVA, there are still flooding problems on occasion. And also to make it navigable and to connect it first to the Ohio River, where the Tennessee River empties into the Ohio, and of course eventually into the Mississippi and the Gulf of Mexico.
It was one of the first and most important projects of the Roosevelt administration, was it not?
That's right. It was part of the first 100 days when they had all of this emergency legislation. And it was a very important act in terms of what it meant in terms of planning, regional planning, sort of Roosevelt's search for the way out of the Depression. This was one of the really important acts, I think.
Employed a lot of people and tamed a wild area.
That's right, yeah. Mm-hmm. Now there's a certain myth, I think, that's grown up around TVA. A myth, I think, in the sense that it was somehow the engine of growth for the region. You have to remember that there were some amazing personalities that came into the area. The TVA sort of became a symbol for good and evil, depending on whether you were for it or against it. Its opponents saw it, proponents saw it as a great planning experience, and its opponents saw it as a threat to the free enterprise system. It depended on which side you stood on. And there was some high rhetoric that was engaged in on both sides of the question. And
it's been some 53 years since signing of the act, right?
That's right.
50. So, how do we view it today?
TVA engages essentially in the same integrated resource management it did then. Much of the controversy that surrounds it's gone. It has its problems like any other authority. Like any other government entity, and with the slowdown in the energy business, it's had some significant cutbacks in its energy and power producing activities and
but still government controlled.
Still government controlled. There have been no real proposals to sell it off by the administration in the sense that they've gone forward. I think there have been some feelers to try to sell the TVA off, but it would really be a very difficult thing to do.
Does TVA mean cheaper electricity for residents of the area?
It means considerably cheaper electricity for the residential consumers. All of the hydroelectric benefits, which is water over the dam, free electricity in a sense, this electricity must be allocated to the homeowner in the Tennessee Valley. For businesses and industry operating in the area, they do not receive the benefits of the hydroelectricity. And TVA's rates are more than competitive with the surrounding utilities. We're located in the middle of the coal fields, and the coal rates are quite competitive. So the homeowner receives some very significant benefits, and rates are still quite low there compared to other areas.
Let's take a look now at what we're talking about, the area itself.
The Tennessee River begins up in the northeast corner of Tennessee, where the Clinch and the French Broad come together right outside of Knoxville to form the Tennessee River. The river does a strange thing. It flows down, you can see, south into the top of Alabama, and then turns due north. Very strange thing for a river to do in North America. Flows across Tennessee and into the river, the Ohio River near Paducah, making this really the southern part of the Ohio Valley and sort of a neighbor to this area.
Ah, this is historic.
This is the signing of the TVA Act. Franklin Roosevelt, of course, is president. The people standing there, by and large, are simply senators and interested individuals. The man standing on Franklin Roosevelt's right is the great progressive senator from Nebraska, George Norris. And it was essentially Norris's conception from the very start to turn Muscle Shoals and the whole TVA area into a public power project.
Interesting, a man from Nebraska that would propose a project for the South. Usually it's the Southern senators that are into that type of thing.
This is the man with the firm grip on the microphone there, of course, is the politician. That's Franklin Roosevelt with Mrs. Roosevelt in the middle. The man sitting closest to us is Arthur Morgan. Arthur Morgan was chosen to head the TVA, and a respected engineer who also conducted the water projects in the Miami Valley of Ohio. This is a TVA dam. I'm sorry, this is the Norris Dam, the first of the great TVA projects, about 25 miles above Knoxville on the Tennessee River, actually on the Clinch River here. And this is, of course, while the dam was under construction. You see many references to the Egyptian pyramids.
You can see the resemblance.
Yes, I always thought it was just a reference to a big construction project. This is the dam shortly after it was closed. Over on the left you can see the quarry where the stone was removed to build the dam itself.
Now it's pictures like this that brought perhaps the negative view of the whole project.
Well, these are some Lewis Hines photos. Lewis Hines was a great photographer. He entered the area behind the Norris Dam. Lake 129 miles in length was created. 3,500 farm families were removed from behind the dam. And he went in and he took some pictures of the people through the valley. And these, I think, are really some of the most enduring pictures you'll see of the Tennessee Valley itself.
How were the families compensated?
They were compensated by TVA based on some formulas for the value of their land and their acreage and its location and the quality of the soil.
Did TVA build schools or help with any of the local problems?
Essentially, they paid for resettlement, and most of the families settled again in the area, some 100 miles away on other farms, and some didn't go back to farming, some moved to Knoxville.
And this is a typical one-room school.
This is the Stooksbury Farm. There are a number of famous photos of these women in bonnets taken by Hines. This again is a picture of the Stooksbury Farm.
What was he trying to show with his photograph?
Well, what he did show was some terrific photographs, some great art. These photos, however, are not really particularly representative of the region that was inundated. While they're marvelous pictures, the farmers that were actually inundated were some of the most affluent people in the Tennessee Valley, having some of the best land adjacent to the river. These pictures of people farming small plots with their mules, while this area was in fact inundated, are not really representative.
Were these photographs used in a negative way by those opposed to the TVA?
No, they really weren't. In fact, they were used in a sense by those in favor of the TVA to show the kind of people they were helping, that they were reaching in and showing and helping poor people.
These people look affluent.
Well, this is the Loyston School. Loyston was the largest community inundated in the Norris area. And you can see that they're really not arriving on mules or coveralls, and the school itself is not a typical one-room school. The people who were actually removed from the area, as I said, were some of the more affluent people in the area.
So there wasn't a great deal of suffering other than the anguish of losing your land and relocation.
Right, that's right. And many of these families had lived on these farms for 100 years.
So you'd have that,
you wouldn't want to belittle that at all.
Oh, no, indeed. There's a great deal of emotional and attachment, of course.
Yeah. This is Norris, Tennessee. It's located a couple of miles near the dam. Originally, it was the construction camp for the workers. TVA turned it into a town with a construction camp area for most of the laborers and a separate area for the individual residences, schools, and so on for the managers of the project.
Norris still exists.
Norris still exists, looks very much like this photograph. The trees are 100 feet tall. That's really the only difference. And
it's a lovely view.
This is the Norris Freeway, part of the great planning scheme to connect Norris to Knoxville and to sort of dot the countryside with these kinds of small communities, plans that never came to fruition.
This road was well ahead of its time. I mean, there's several lanes, what, 3 or 4, or 3 at least.
Right, and they tried to use very carefully controlled access and exits to control the growth in the community. This is a picture of the construction camp itself. This is the mess hall. You can see that life for the laborers in the camp was actually fairly primitive. This is the homes of some of the managers in the area. These houses, by and large, still exist. The houses rented from rates that ran from $8 to $30 a month in those days.
These look like any suburban type house of the day.
It was the only government project later sold that earned a profit that was from the whole period. And it was partly because they paid attention to local styles and architecture and didn't go with the flat-top tar roof kind of government construction that was common. This is the Norris Drug Store, part of the Norris community. You can see certainly quite modern for the 1930s. And this was the local gas station.
Quite a modern gas station for the 1930s.
Mm-hmm. These were the other two directors of the TVA early in the project. David Lilienthal is in the middle there. This is an early board meeting. Lilienthal's regarded as the greatest of the directors.
But he'd be on the right with the glasses?
He'd be on the right in the dark jacket. And the man sitting just to his left was the other project director, Harcourt Morgan, from the University of Tennessee.
And what is the status of the TVA today?
As I said, it conducts pretty much the same programs. We employ 35,000 people. The power program is by far the largest part in terms of resources and ongoing expenditures of money and the size of the program. But the integrated resource program still exists today.
Did it change the area in a negative or a positive way, socially or economically?
I think it changed it in a positive way socially. It put the area on the path to growth. I think it brought some remarkable people into the region. Economically, I'm not so sure that it made the kind of difference many people would like to attribute to it. I think that's partly a myth. You had such a great stage, you had such a great project, then you put Lilienthal and FDR and George Norris on the stage with them, and it's easy to think that more was going on than really was, I think. But TVA's economic contribution in terms of what it's done on the river has been very positive.
Has TVA outlived its usefulness?
No, I don't think that's the case. It was an experiment. It's never been duplicated. It's the only place where you find this combination of integrated resource development. It's been said there were a number of proposals at one time to have a Missouri Valley Authority and to duplicate it in Oregon and Washington. It never happened. But I think really you have to realize that it's very unusual it happened once. and it still represents, I think, an interesting experiment in American government.
It's surprising, as successful as it obviously has been, that it was not duplicated in other areas of the country.
Many proposals, a lot of entrenched bureaucratic opposition from the Department of Interior and the Department of Agriculture, in part, killed it off, I think.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our guest has been Mr. Gilmer, Robert W. Gilmer, who is on leave from the staff of the Chief Economist, Tennessee Valley Authority, and is a visiting professor at Ball State University. The Ball State University Graduate String Quartet performed for us Movement 3 of Haydn's Quartet in F Major, Opus 74, number 2. Dr. Richard Brown is director of the Louisiana School for Math, Science, and Arts for the Gifted and Talented. Dr. Brown discusses with us the important role programs such as the one offered at his school have on education. Ball State University is asking the Indiana General Assembly to fund similar type programs to be called the Indiana Academy of Sciences and Humanities for talented high school juniors and seniors at Burris School. Dr. Brown, how long has the Louisiana School for Math, Science, and the Arts been in operation?
Louisiana School was created by act of legislature in 1981 without a dissenting vote, was funded in 1982 with one dissenting vote, and became operational in the fall of '83.
What prompted that wide base of support for the school?
Basically because of preliminary work by the House Education Committee, headed by Representative Jimmy Long, and his work with then Dean of Education at Northwestern State University, Dr. Bobby Aloss. Together, They formulated the concept. They did take their cue, I have to admit, from the North Carolina School. So what you had in this situation was a legislator working side by side with an educator and a very influential legislator to formulate the school. And basically they did their homework before it came before the floor, before the bill was introduced. And it was a shoo-in. And it has, I'm happy to say, maintained its support.
What are the ages of the students, and what size student body?
We have 400 students. We have 200, we admit 200 juniors, new juniors each year. And we graduate slightly under 200 each year.
You're the second director of a school for gifted and talented I've talked to, where the enrollment is around 400. Is this ideal for this kind of a school?
We think so, and for a state of Louisiana's size and population, and we think it's appropriate, and we did not, and of course the funding also aspect becomes involved in this. We have about a $3 million budget, and that's roughly $8,000 per student. If you take the operation budget and you divide it by the number of students, that's 8,000 plus. Now, I'm sure that in Illinois dollars, that would be substantially more.
How does that compare in Louisiana to your public school?
In Louisiana, $2,700 per year is required to educate each student.
So it is well funded, really.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. While the math and science curriculum are found in the 3 state academies for talented and gifted, your school also includes the arts. Could you tell us the scope of your offerings, including the arts, and what prompted adding the arts?
We have had problems trying to merge the two, but we're still groping about for direction. But the arts is a necessary component, we feel, of this school. We are not striving for technocrats in the ultimate sense of the word. We want technical people who are good humanitarians and who have a chance to use their artistic talent or inclinations, as the case may be. Strangely enough, many of our best mathematicians and our young scientists are also budding musicians and interested in the arts overall. And so we feel that it's a vital component of our school. And perhaps we differ in that way. The problem occurs because in the classroom, the art majors are required to sit in the same academic classes with your academically gifted students. And herein lies the problem that we're trying to work out. I submit, however, that the benefits outweigh the other side of it, the disadvantages of it. And so we're still groping there. But our art students, and we do have an art major there. You can major in art at the Louisiana School, which means you come in with a lower SAT, lower academic scores, etc. And we take people because of artistic talent. And they struggle sometimes academically, but we feel it's a vital component of our school. And were we to do it over, we would do the same thing. We would not separate the two.
How have the public schools in your state accepted the Louisiana School for Math, Science, and the Arts? Are you working together to help reinforce the programs for talented and gifted in the public schools too?
We are. At the present time, we are teaching via computer telecommunications courses to high schools 100 miles distant from our location. We teach a calculus course, we teach a survey of the arts course via computer and a telephone hookup. That's one of the outreach programs that we're engaged in. We also do work for teachers, teacher enrichment, professional gatherings, etc. There is and still remains some opposition out there in the local schools, but we try to present ourselves as extensions of existing systems rather than as competitors. And they object, many of them object also because they see money going into our school, and that means that they would get less money. So those or the basic reasons why they would oppose it. It's a public relations game you have to play. We go out with to the schools, we bring the local school people in, we try to create goodwill, and I think we've been successful. We've turned the corner in overcoming the opposition that was originally there. Although there was no opposition in the legislature initially, there was opposition out there in the local school systems. And some of it is, quite frankly, professional jealousy.
And of course, when you're competing for the legislative dollar, there's bound to be some
Exactly.
jealousy.
Exactly.
Is your program a residential one, similar to the North Carolina program?
It is indeed. We have our students 24 hours a day. We have them 3 weekends each month. They generally go home 1 weekend a month. We do a lot of work on the weekends and at night. So we're a residential school. The concept is and remains that if you get an outstanding faculty, an exemplary student body, and put them together in some delimited area, something will happen. And that's the basic concept.
Do you have any difficulty in getting an exemplary faculty?
We advertise nationwide. We advertise in the Chronicle of Education. We advertise in other professional journals, and we do have a national faculty.
How do you select the children for the school?
We have, it's a complicated formula. I would say that the two basic criteria would be GPA, grade point average, in the 10th grade at their local school, and of course SAT scores. But there are other factors that are weighted into that, and it's a very complicated formula that time does not permit me to get into. We do not have a minimum per se. We have a minimum that we look for, but we do strive to get at least one student from each school district or each parish in Louisiana. So we're trying to do both. We're trying to get that geographical representation, and we're trying to maintain those very high standards that we have. Sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes you have to make some tough decisions.